Greetings, this is Ted A. Roberts with Seeking the Everlasting Gospel Ministries, and we finally made it to chapter 6 of my book, New Jerusalem, the Mother of Us All. So let's go ahead and get started right quick. Now, this chapter is called Jesus Planting Seeds for 3.5 years. Before speaking of the daughter of Jerusalem any further, as we had done in the last chapter, I have to first refresh some other ideas that I've already forwarded in this book. Bring some thoughts back to certain areas for better consideration. However, before I could do so, I had to first set the stage in previous chapters so that I can now expand a little further. This is in consideration of Jesus having the mind of Christ prior to the day of Pentecost. Surely, without having that mindset already, that is, New Testament thoughts, New Testament teachings, Jesus could not have done and said the things that he did during his 3.5 year ministry. But this certainly does not mean that he was cheating on his first wife, the Old Jerusalem, that is, the Old Testament thoughts and teachings, whilst not only becoming one with this New Jerusalem, but of planting seeds with her during his earthen ministry. In fact, this is all what this is boiling down to. That is, of a spiritual marriage, of planting seeds into fresh converts, and then stepping back and watching the Holy Spirit water that seed, again on the day of Pentecost, allowing it to finally come to life. For this is the step process that I have been alluding to: planting of seeds, watering the seeds, then them coming to life, of which event the scriptures in many places have much to tell us. This is not only the function of the New Jerusalem and of the Lamb, that is, the process of having kids, but so is the function of the inner man and the daughter of Jerusalem, that is, our responsibility as the soldiers of Christ, of which marriage union I'm going to speak further on, as I've already promised to do, but it's going to be in an upcoming chapter. But going back to Jesus not cheating on his first wife, we've already seen in the book of Jeremiah where Jesus had already given her a bill of divorce, which I've spoken on in an explanatory note for chapter 1 called We Will Be Comforted in New Jerusalem. Now, I've already said concerning that bill that it was a prophecy of what was to come to pass in the future. That is, when Jesus died on the cross, and of getting him loose from the law of his first wife, the Old Jerusalem. But that action was the final stage of the divorce. Already by Moses' day, that divorce was imminent and unavoidable. Let's go to Deuteronomy 31:29. This is Moses talking to the children of Israel. I know that after my death you will utterly corrupt yourselves and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days, because you're going to do evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger through the work of your hands. But before we go any further, let's talk about Moses' statement about evil will befall you in the latter days, which is kind of an important thought to quickly go over. So this explanatory note is called The Latter Days. What will throw a lot of people off is this kind of wording, that is, the latter days. Even though most people will have a single image in their minds, as in at the end of time as we know it, the biblical writers had something else in mind altogether. In fact, it's just such wording that makes simple Bible studies a very complicated task, because for the most part, the majority of the reading audience is not able to see the concept for what it really is, in that it does not mean the end of natural time. Such statements, as we will see, simply means the end of the Old Testament era, of which time the writers of the Bible often spoke about. Now let's see a few quick examples of what I'm talking about from the Bible. Starting in Hebrews 9:26b. But now, once in the end of the world, has he, Jesus, appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Now, what was that? Will Jesus return again at the end of the planet's life and die on the cross once again? No. But this is simply saying the end at the end of the Old Testament world. Hebrews 1, 1 through 2. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spoke in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days, that is, the end of the Old Testament period and the beginning of the New Testament period, has spoken unto us by his Son, through Jesus' ministry, whom he has appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds. Now, with these two verses that I just gave, let's expand our view, shall we? This is not only speaking of the end of the Old Testament world, but indeed of the end days, which actually covered a 40-year length of time. Now, what I'm about to say is very important for end-time prophecy calculations. And from here on out, in this part of my teaching series, that is, in my end-time prophecy set of books, which this is the first one, such understandings will be of exceptional use. We have to see that the latter-day judgment spoken of in the Old Testament referred to what had culminated in AD 70 with the destruction of the Jewish temple, which was at the end of a 3.5-year siege of the Holy City by Roman forces, that not only ravaged all of Israel, but ended with the total destruction of Jerusalem and of the sacred temple itself. Now, as most biblical scholars can agree to, most, if not all, of the New Testament letters, and I'm one of those who believe that all of the New Testament letters were written prior to that time, prior to AD 70, which left the future judgment spoken of in the Old Testament as to being fulfilled in the words of the historian Flavius Josephus, who wrote the monumental work Wars of the Jews in about AD 75, that spoke of the very war which I had just referred to, of which work we're going to become familiar with in this set of books in my teaching series. Now, as far as that 40-year gap that I had mentioned, it covers the period between the day of Pentecost, which is circa AD 30, somewhere around there, and it ends at AD 70 with the leveling of the temple by the Roman army. Now, having that in mind, let me continue quoting some verses. Let's go to Luke 21, verses 20 through 22. This is Jesus talking. When you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies of Rome, he's talking about Rome, which besieging again ended in AD 70, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh or near. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. All things written have to be fulfilled at that time? Yes, he's talking about the natural prophecies of the Old Testament, as we're going to continue to see in this series, even in this book as we continue along. Let's go to 1 John 2:18a. Little children, it is, present tense, it is the last time. Let's go to the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, verses 14 through 17. This is just a summary here. Peter, standing up with the 11, lifted up his voice, saying, You men of Judea, these are not drunken as you suppose, but this, i.e., this thing that you're witnessing right now, this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel, when he said, And it shall come to pass, quoting Joel about Peter's day, it shall come to pass in the last days, says God, I will pour out of my spirit upon all flesh. Talking about the day of Pentecost. And finally, 1 Peter 1:19 through 20. But with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot, who verily was foreordained before the foundation of the world, but was manifest in these last times for you. Talking about back in Peter's day. Again, we're going to continue to see examples such as these, which will confirm that the latter days were when the Old Testament was going out of existence, the dying of the first heaven, and of when the New Testament was coming into existence, the arrival of the second heaven. Now, I want to speak on preterist. For those of you who are unfamiliar with that word, preterist, you're going to do yourselves a favor by becoming familiar with that word. But be very careful of whose opinions you adapt, because not everybody is fair in their assessment of preterist. Basically, it's a person who views biblical prophecies, whether some, half of them, or even all of them, as to have been fulfilled already in historic times, especially by AD 70 and with the leveling of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the other camp, called futurist, observe biblical prophecies, especially in the book of Revelation, to have futuristic fulfillment and are things that are yet to come in our future. It's been teased about that a preterist will seek prophetic fulfillment in a history book, while a futurist will file through a current newspaper for information. As funny as that saying may sound, it has some basis in truth. But believe it or not, though, there's bitterness between a lot of people on both sides toward each other. And it's a fight that has no merit whatsoever. One can be a preterist, whilst another can be a futurist, and they can both be a child of God. As for myself, I certainly agree with some preterist insights, though I've never called myself a preterist or even considered myself to be a preterist, simply because many have made a religion out of it and use that name as one would similarly would use Baptist, Pentecostal, Catholic, etc. As I express my views of such factions, and in detail in my book, The Church and the Fivefold Ministry, which I'm also in the middle of reading, and some other videos, I certainly won't do so here. But I'm going to say that I do not affiliate myself with any known organized religion. So I'm going to simply say that I again share some views with those who call themselves preterists without calling myself one. Because again, of my views, which I have already expressed in my aforementioned book. But that's certainly not putting anybody down for calling themselves that anyway. The fact of the matter is that I had only recently, within the past 5 to 7 years, which now probably has been about 10 years, that I even heard the term preterist. But I've had similar views as early as 1992. And I've incorporated such doctrinal views, if one wishes to call them so, without the aid of a person who called themselves a preterist. With that, I assure my readers that I did not begin as a preterist, but already had similar beliefs within my own repertoire when I did finally meet one. Now, I'm saying all this to show the reader that despite my similar views, and yet one will see with my continued approach that I don't agree with everything that they say, I'm not trying to be biased on a particular religious belief. And I'm not trying to champion any particular cause. I believe that the scriptures have to be the final word of authority on any doctrinal belief or insight. And just because a person is of a particular belief or organization, they should not allow any of that to stop their beliefs towards a clearer understanding if the scriptures compel them to change.